Be Quiet is one of the few manufacturers that did not go overboard with the RGB implementation. The FX series is launched around the same time as the 20-year mark for the company. The PureRock 2 FX is different than other Be Quiet air CPU coolers as it uses the new Lightwings fan, plenty of RGB and an offset heatsink design for better memory clearance. However, given the size of the heatsink and the single 120mm fan, can this little CPU cooler handle something more than a mid-range CPU? We shall see in this review. The Be Quiet PureRock 2 FX is a classic air CPU cooler that not only uses a single 120mm fan but has a TDP rating of 150 watts. The PureRock 2 FX is a direct touch heat pipe cooler, which means that the heat pipes are integrated into the surface of the baseplate, but more on that later. In terms of the pricing, the PureRock 2 FX is available for purchase right now for around $43 to $45 US. I say around as the price is not yet set in stone. The design of the PureRock 2 FX is great. In fact, Be Quiet might just have the best addressable RGB air CPU cooler on the market looks-wise. Not because it has RGB, but because it manages to blend the addressable RGB LEDs with the all-black heatsink and brushed aluminum top plate. The heatsink uses 55 aluminum-made cooling fins which are bent on the edges. This type of bending is a classic move as it channels the air through the heatsink and increases the overall structural rigidity of the heatsink. The edges of the cooling fins are sanded smooth and will not cause you any issues during the installation process. The top plate of the heatsink is solid metal and has a lovely linear brushed texture. This type of texture is nothing new and Be Quiet has been doing it for years with the Dark Rock CPU cooler series. This is one reason why this top plate is made so well, as the company has experience in designing and producing such components. Fortunately for us, the heat pipe endings are covered by metal-made caps that feature a radial pattern on the top. Usually the heat pipe endings are not machined symmetrically and their uneven look break the overall design of the cooler. The heatsink has its cooling fins shaped in such a way to make the installation process easier, hence why you see this rounded gap at the back of the CPU cooler. It will provide you with easy access with a screwdriver or even your hands. The heat pipes used on the PureRock 2 FX are made from copper and are painted in the same black as the rest of the heatsink. The cooler has a total of 4 heat pipes and all of them are shaped around the heatsink in the standard U shape. This is done to not only provide a good base for the cooling fins but also to evenly dissipate the heat around the system. As I've said in the beginning of this review, the PureRock 2 FX has a direct touch baseplate design, which means that the heat pipes are integrated into the surface of the baseplate. This type of baseplate is regarded as inferior to a solid copper baseplate, as no matter how much you try, with the heat pipes integrated into the surface, the baseplate will not be as smooth as a solid copper baseplate. The PureRock 2 FX has its thermal compound pre-applied on the baseplate, which is great for beginners as it takes the guesswork out for them. It is not that great for everyone else as the pre-applied thermal compound can be easily damaged during shipping or during the installation process. The PureRock 2 FX uses the all-new Lightwing fan, a new series of Be Quiet fans that include, you guessed it, addressable RGB LEDs. This is a 120mm fan that has a ring of light on the front part of the frame. This fan has a maximum speed of 2000 RPM and a minimum speed of around 300, and uses a standard rifle bearing system. The corners of the fan frame have thick rubber pads on both sides. These are great because they not only protect the heatsink from potential scratches, but they will dampen the vibrations generated by the rotational movement of the impellers. For connectors, this fan has only 2. A single 4-pin for power and a single 3-pin for the RGB LEDs. Unfortunately, there is no sleeving protecting these wires, but at least the wires are black and will match the rest of your system. When we talk about the accessories, there's plenty. We have a user manual, 2 sets of fan clips, and thus you can install 2 fans with the CPU cooler. Then you get the usual components of the mounting system, a backplate, 2 sets of Intel mounting arms, a single set of AMD mounting arms, 4 studs, 4 rubber grommets, 4 standoffs, 4 mounting screws, a mount bar, and 2 screws for the aforementioned mount bar. The installation process is, well, let's just say that it's involved. You get the backplate, then you insert the studs in the correct spaces. Afterwards, you attach the rubber grommets to the studs, basically locking them onto the backplate. Then the backplate goes on the back of the CPU socket, and at the front you screw in these standoffs onto the studs. When that's done, you place the correct mounting bars over the standoffs and secure those with these small screws. Finally, you place the mounting bar over the base plate of the CPU cooler and place the whole thing on the CPU, aligning the mounting bar holes with the smaller mounting bars that you already installed, and then you secure that with these two larger screws. And that's it. You then install the fan onto the heatsink, connect everything to your motherboard, and you are done. And this is how the Be Quiet PureRock 2 FX looks like installed in my testing system. While I'm not a fan of RGB LEDs of any kind, I do have to admit that the PureRock 2 FX looks great with its addressable RGB ring at the front. In addition, the brushed texture of the top plate stands out and gives the CPU cooler an elegant look that is characteristic of Be Quiet. The graphics card clearance is good, with 28mm of space between the graphics card backplate and the side of the CPU cooler. Obviously, this will vary based on your motherboard, as some models will have their PCIe slots installed lower or higher, so your mileage will vary. When it comes to RAM clearance, things are looking good, with ample space for all 4 RAM slots of the motherboard. The space between the lower part of the fan and the RAM kit is irrelevant, as the fan does not even reach the RAM slots, let alone interfere with them. Before we test the CPU cooler, you will get to hear a noise sample of the included fan going from 0 RPM to its maximum rated speed of 2000 RPM. I am doing this because while a decibel value is useful for comparing the cooler to other models, it does not consider other noise sources such as the fan bearing, the fan vibrations on the heatsink, and the tune of the sound emitted by the CPU cooler. With a single 120mm fan spinning at a maximum of 2000 RPM, the PureRock 2 FX reached a maximum noise output of 45 decibels, a result reached with the measuring device placed at a standard distance of 10 cm away from the system and CPU cooler. For testing of all CPU coolers, an Intel i9-9900K CPU is used, both at its factory turbo boost frequency and manually overclocked to 5 GHz on all cores. The testing system is installed inside a Be Quiet Silent Base 802 case. All testing is done with an ambient temperature of 26 degrees Celsius. The first test is using the Intel BurnTest V2 benchmark, a popular synthetic benchmark used to test the stability of overclocked CPUs, and in our case it is useful because it places a load onto the CPU which is similar in severity to what you will get when playing a modern AAA video game. And in this test, the Be Quiet PureRock 2 FX reached a maximum temperature of 72 degrees Celsius with the CPU overclocked to 5 GHz on all cores, and a maximum temperature of 62 degrees Celsius with the CPU running at its factory turbo boost frequency and voltage. This result places the PureRock 2 FX on the same level of performance as the Be Quiet ShadowRock Slim and 2 degrees cooler than the PureRock 2. However, the next test is where our CPU coolers are pushed to their limit, some beyond that, as this test uses the system stability test of the AIDA 64 Extreme software. This benchmark places an unrealistically high load onto the CPU, something which you will never encounter in your daily usage, but it has its purpose when testing CPU coolers. And in this test, the PureRock 2 FX reached a maximum temperature of 90 degrees Celsius, with the CPU overclocked to 5 GHz on all cores, and a maximum temperature of 69 degrees Celsius, with the CPU running at its factory turbo boost frequency and voltage. These results place the PureRock 2 FX ahead of the PureRock 2 and some other small air CPU coolers. When we look at the overall picture, what is the purpose of the PureRock 2 FX? It's clearly better than the normal PureRock 2, but that's only because of the better fan that also spins faster. Outside of that, the PureRock 2 FX is a small air CPU cooler that should not be used for overclocking. Even with an Intel i9-9900K CPU, the cooler managed to stay outside of the thermal throttle range. The Be Quiet PureRock 2 FX is an ideal CPU cooler for a mid-range CPU and a gaming system. Anything higher than that and you will need additional fans on the heatsink, or better, just a bigger CPU cooler like the Be Quiet Direct Pro 4 or the Noctua NH U12A. In terms of the noise, the PureRock 2 FX is quiet, even though you wouldn't think so given the 45 decibel measurement. However, as I've said before, the decibel measurement is not going to offer you the full picture. That's why you get the noise sample. The noise generated by the PureRock 2 FX is not that annoying, and it's not like you will have to use the CPU cooler with the fan running at maximum speed all day long. The Be Quiet PureRock 2 FX is a good mid-range CPU cooler that is quiet and well built. It also looks great. However, this CPU cooler is a tough sell for those that already have the PureRock 2 or something similar in performance, as the Be Quiet PureRock 2 FX is not really offering a significant performance increase. If you want a good looking CPU cooler that is well made and quiet, then the Be Quiet PureRock 2 FX might be a good choice for you if you can find it at a good price. Otherwise, you have plenty of other options available, including the non-RGB variant of the PureRock 2 FX. If you like this review, then you might consider subscribing for more, and if you want to support me in a direct way, then in the description below you will find the links for both the Patreon and the subscriber star pages of this channel.